Hello, in this video we are going to talk about how to set the advanced scenarios of permissions in SharePoint. If you are interested in simple scenarios of permissions, you can see our tutorial for setting permissions in SharePoint. You will find it written down in the description. As we all know, the purpose of SharePoint permissions is to protect our contents and data, and give them the most privacy and confidentiality. SharePoint provides us with all the possibilities to grant permissions, regardless of the level of permissions, or the content type. But sometimes we face difficulty on how to grant permissions on specific data, such as dynamic data, or the data entered by visitors or general users. Or we have an old list of data, and we want to modify the permissions on it. Or we have a certain condition to set the permission on it. We are going to take examples of these scenarios and see how to grant advanced permissions using Spark Workflow Permission, with simple steps, without any difficulties compared with the difficulties in SharePoint itself. Let's start with the first example. How to set permission on item level on the creation of this item. Okay. We have this list for the employees to apply a leave request. We are going to give these requests more privacy, which means to let the user see only his requests, not all the requests. So, we have to customize the permission on the item level. We are going to grant the initiator read-only permission on each item, and let's also grant contribute permission to the manager. First, we are going to grant the permissions within SharePoint, and then we will use Spark Workflow Permissions, and see the difference. Let's start. Select the item, and from the three dots select Share. Up the page the three dots again. From the bottom, click on Advance. And here we are the screen for the item permissions. Stop the inheriting permissions. And delete the All Organization Users group. And add the initiator. Set the permission read-only for the initiator. Technically we can do it manually, as we did it now. But this is not the practical way and is hard to manage. Because once have a new item, we have to repeat these steps, and while we customize the permissions, the item is available to everyone. Let's log in with Mike's account, and see how he will see only his request. So what to do? The best way to set permissions on item level is to use Set Permission by Workflow. The permission is set automatically by Workflow once the item is created. Let's see how to set the permissions with Spark Workflow. Now let's start creating the workflow through Spark Workflow Designer. As you see here, in our list there is a link to manage Spark Workflow. You will find this link in every single list or library on your SharePoint. So, from here, the workflow that we are going to be created is linked to the list without any configuration from our side. Click on Manage Spark Workflows. Here is the Spark Workflow landing page. From here we are going to select New List Workflow. Now the Spark Workflow Designer is open. And we have two nodes as we see, the Start node and the End node. In the beginning, we are going to set the workflow settings. Like enter the workflow name and the description. As you see here, we have many options, like start when the item is created or updated. In this case, we are going to focus on just starting when the item is created. Then save. OK. Now we are going to set the permission for the item. So, now we are going to drag and drop the item permissions activity, and configure it. Okay, we are going to add the activity title, which is set item permissions. Here set permission on current item, that is what we want. Uncheck inherit permissions from parent, we want to stop the inherent to set ours. Now select remove existing permissions. Here we remove the existing permissions before adding new permissions. Let's add the Spark owner for admin. And set full control permission. Then click and add user permission. Add group HR management. Set edit permission. Selecting the initiator from the dynamic data list. And set the permission read. Then selecting the manager from the dynamic data list. And set the permission contribute. Then save. And here we have finished the workflow. So we are going to publish it to be ready to use. Now let's test what we did. Sarah is a user of this organization, so she can add a leave request. Let's enter the data quickly. And save. Now let's see Sally. Sally is a user of this organization, so she can add a leave request. Again, let's enter the data quickly. And save. Now we're going to log in by the admin account. As you see here, this is the requests that we have created. Let's see the permissions on this item. Okay, select the item, and from the three dot, select Share. Up the page, the three dots again. From the bottom, click on Advance. And here we are, the screen for the item permissions. And here we are, these are the permissions we set using a Spark workflow. Let's see Sarah. Sarah can see only her requests, not all the requests. Now let's see Sally. Sally can see only her requests, not all the requests. Now let's see another example and another scenario. Let's go to Announcements and Circulars list. In this list, we may add announcements for all users, or for the special departments. With Spark Workflow, we can set permission on item level based on condition, or let's say based on column value, like the example we have here. So we have here publish column to determine who should have permission on this item, whether it is public, or HR, or public relations department. Let's create the workflow and see how the if statement action work. Click on Manage Spark Workflows. Select New List Workflow. Set the workflow settings. Enter the workflow name and the description. Select Start when the item is created. At Custom Workflow Status, we are going to add our option Publish, and if you have any other you can add them. Then save. The first thing we're going to do in our workflow is use if statement. So, we are going to use the if-else condition activity. Okay, let's drag and drop the if-else condition activity and configure it. As you see here, we have two branches, the right side is the if, and the left side is the else if. Now, we are going to clicking on Add Condition. Let's create the condition, select Publish Column. And if publish equal, enter the public. Then click on OK. Then in else if branch. Again clicking on Add Condition. Select Publish Column. And if publish equal, enter the HR department. Then click on OK. Now, we need other else if branch. Let's add a new one, by clicking on Add Else If Branch. Select Publish Column. And if publish equal, enter the Public Relations Department. Then save. OK, in the if branch, if public, we are going to set the read permission for all users for the item. So let's drag and drop the item permissions activity and configure it. OK, enter the activity title, which is set item permissions public. Here set permission on current item, that is what we want. Uncheck inherit permissions from parent. Now select remove existing permissions. Let's add all users group. And set read permission. Then save. OK, in the else if branch, if HR department, we are going to set the contribute permission for HR department for the item. So let's drag and drop the item permissions activity and configure it. OK, enter the activity title, which is set item permissions HR department. Here set permission on current item. Uncheck inherit permissions from parent. Now select remove existing permissions. Let's add the HR department group. And set contribute permission. Then save. In the second else if branch, if public relations department, we repeated the same steps for the HR department. Here we are, we set the permissions based on publish's column value. Now let's see another scenario, which is what to do if we need the feedback and modification from each department. Then changing the item permission to be read for all users. To do this, let's first add the request review action. So let's drag and drop the request review activity in the HR branch and configure it. If you want more details about how to set request review, or approval actions, or lazy approvals, you can see the tutorial videos listed in the description below. Now we are going to change permissions to the public. Let's drag and drop the set permission, and do the same step in the public case. In the second else if branch, if public relations department, we repeated the same steps for the HR department. After changing the permissions, we are going to change the announcement status to publish. So we are going to use the set workflow status activity and configure it. From the set workflow window, select the status to be publish. Modify the title and save. And here we are, we have finished the workflow. So we are going to publish it to be ready to use. Now let's test what we did. We are going to add a general meeting announcement, as an example, and it will be published to the public directly. Add new item. Fill in the data. Select public. And save. Now let's check the permission that sets for this item. Here we are, all users have read permission on it. And if we have a quick view of the workflow, we can track how the workflow progress. Okay, now we are going to add another example, training workshop announcement, and it will be published to the public, after the review from the HR department. Add new item. Fill in the data. Select HR department. And save. Now let's check the permission that sets for this item. As we see here, the HR group have contributed permission to make any modification on the item. Let's make the HR reviews. If we log in with Jim. Jim is in the HR group, so he has a contribute permission. He can see the item, and apply any modification to it if he wants. Okay, now if everything is okay, he wants to publish this announcement. So from his email, he will take an action complete, so the workflow goes to the next step. As we use in this example, the lazy approval to make the decision. As I mentioned before, all the details about how to make a request or review approval, you will find it in the tutorial mentioned in the description below. Now let's check the permission again, after the review has been completed. Here we are, all users have read permission on it. We can set any permission we need, like set permission to the special group, not to all users as an example. Let's again have a quick view of the workflow. As we see here, the workflow went to the HR department, to set read permission after the review. Okay, for now, we learned how to set permissions at the item level on creating. And it will be the same technique on updating, if I want to change the permission, after item editing. We saw also how to change the permissions based on conditions, and after reviews or approval. But what can we do, when we already have a large list of items, and want to set certain permission on each item? Each item has different permission than the other. So, it will not work to set the permissions on the site, or list level. Once again, with Spark Workflow, we can set the permissions of all items in this list. This list is for employee profiles. I am going to set permissions to each item, so that the user profile appears only to the user, and his manager. Let's see how we can achieve this easily and within minutes. Now again, let's create the workflow, through Spark Workflow Designer. Click on Manage Spark Workflows. Select New List Workflow. Set the workflow settings. Enter the workflow name and the description. Here, we are going to start workflow manually. Then save. Okay, now we want to set certain permission on each item in the list. To do this we need to edit each item. Instead of doing it manually we will use the for each activity. Okay, now we are going to drag and drop the for each activity, and configure it. As you see here we have many options, like camel query, or collection, or text iteration. In this case, we are going to use camel query. Here current site, which is what we want. Then select the user profile list. To make the loop, we need to retrieve the list items to iterate through them. So let's build the camel query, by clicking on Generate Camel Query. Okay, now from the right side, here columns list we are going to select the ID. Because the iterate will be based on the item ID. And select Employee Login. And select Manager, to retrieve them and use it in permissions. Now, we want to add a filter, which is for keep looping, and retrieving the item's IDs until reaching the last item. My list has 7 items, so the last item ID equals 7. Now, select the ID to compare with it, and keep iterating until the 8 is less or equals 7. From the top ribbon we are going to clicking on Insert. Now after generating camel query, we need to store item ID, employee login, and the manager. We need variables to store the values in. So, we are going to create the variables. From the top ribbon click on Variables. Then Add button. Enter variable name, ID variable. Selecting variable type, integer. Again click on Add button. Enter variable name, employee variable. Selecting variable type, person or group. And the same for the manager. Then save. OK, now select the ID variable to store the value in. Then select ID from the fields list. Then click on Add. The same for the employee and the manager. Then save. OK. Now we are going to set the permissions for all items in the list. Let's drag and drop the item permissions activity in for each activity and configure it. OK, type the activity title, set item permissions. Uncheck current item. Select the user profile list. Now select the ID to compare with variable. Occurrence, here first occurrence, that is what we want. Uncheck inherit permissions from parent. Now select remove existing permissions. Let's add the Spark owner for admin. And set full control permission. Then click and add user permission. Selecting the employee login from the dynamic data list. And set the permission contribute. Then selecting the manager from the dynamic data list. And set the permission contribute. Then save. And here we are, we have finished the workflow. So we are going to publish it to be ready to use. Now let's test what we did. OK, now let's start the workflow manually. Select the item, and from the 3 dot, select More. Then click on Workflow. Select the workflow edit permission for user profile. And here we are, this screen for Start Workflow. Click on the Start button. Cool, now items have different permissions. Let's see the permissions on this item. Select the item, and from the three dot, select Share. Up the page the three dots again. And here we are, these are the permissions we set using a Spark workflow. Mike, and his manager Jack. Now let's see another item. Here the user is Sally, and her manager is Seema. This is a simple and general overview of the capabilities provided by Spark Workflow. And there are many more features that enable us to accurately customize our work. This is how to set permissions on item level with Spark Workflow. Follow us to learn more on how to set permissions to this list, and also how to make a special design for this list and much more. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe, and if you have a comment please write it down. Thank you.